named Awana, and the title is just wow, because that's what I felt when I was seeing her growth, and this was in the Writing Center during choice time. I definitely had a wow moment with my student Awana. Awana came into our classroom in September with little knowledge and awareness of basic print, colors, numbers, and shapes as well. Although Ms. Morrison, my aide, and I had been working closely with Awana, we did not see significant progress until this past week. The great thing about her progress was that it came not just from her direct interactions, not just from our direct interactions with Awana, but from her interactions with other students, her peers. During afternoon choice time, I found her writing letters on whiteboards with a small group of her friends. First, I was happy to see Awana using the whiteboard marker from her own kit, since the first month or so she would confuse her name with others and consequently use materials from other students' supply kits. Her friends supported her growth in this area by helping her find her supply kit numerous times. Then Awana and I had a conversation. I asked her, "What are you writing, Awana?" "My friends," she said. "Oh, whose name is this?" I said as I pointed to the letter S Awana had written. "Samar." "And what about that letter? What is that?" I said, pointing to the letter A. "A," she said. "Whose name starts with A?" And as her face lit up, "My name." "Who else is a name that starts with the letter A?" She said, "Allie." As we discussed her writing, some of her friends began to take out note paper and envelopes. Awana quickly jumped up and said, "I'm going to write a letter." She watched her friends and followed their lead. One of her friends reminded her to put a name on her envelope. They then dropped the letters in the mailbox and moved on to the Dramatic Play Center. So that was just an example of what I had seen in terms of her growth, but like I said in the excerpt, it was also impressive to me just to see how she was learning from her peers. And, I read a lot about the importance of peer interactions and centers when I was taking my early childhood classes at Montclair State, but you never really get what that means until you see young children doing it and growing from it. So that it wasn't just about me being the teacher and telling her what to do. In contrast, I found that my kids actually, many of them grew the most when they could, yes, learn from me, but also learn from their fellow peers and have a chance to grow and develop in the centers of their choice, as I'm sure many of you have experienced from the field. And the other reason I became so convinced that early childhood education was important was not so much what I could see on a daily basis by looking at my kids, but in imagining, can you all hear me? Yes, maybe
He's trying to adjust it.
Oh, okay.
Give him a second. Yeah, so it's too loud. Try it now.
Are we good? Are we good? Okay. In trying to imagine what those skills that we were learning would look like in 20 to 30 years, and in terms of how those skills would help my children realize their potential in the long run. So not to say that pre-K solves all problems and a child who does well in pre-K will, have all these great options necessarily, but to say that it's an important and a necessary start. And so, just to give you a few examples, when we were sitting around in circle time, sort of coming up with contingency plans for Humpty Dumpty. I didn't put it that way to the students, but I might have at one point. But anyway, trying to figure out, so how are we going to fix Humpty Dumpty? And some students arguing for a glue option, other students talking about ropes and getting people together to fix them. And so I just sort of stood back and thought, well, how will this help them in 20 to 30 years? So obviously there are going to be times when one solution doesn't work and you need to find another. I guess I saw engineers and doctors actively problem solving. And also knowing that, if they don't have the answer, their friends might. And so that seeing firsthand the value of those interactions, not just in terms of the classroom, but for the long run. And then also, going back to the Writing Center, seeing, my students writing letters, trying to figure out, how am I going to tell my brother that I loved playing Batman with him yesterday? And going through the process with them of thinking about how they can do something how they can use writing to convey thoughts, and then thinking about, well, I wonder where that would be useful in life. Where is it not useful? And so for me, it was this direct observation of what was going on with my kids, and also just projecting out into the future to see how this would really equip them with the skills that they would need to have real choices in life. So I was sold, as many of you literature sold on the importance of early childhood education. And then I thought, well, because it's so important, how can I make sure to really maximize my time with young students and to fulfill the promise of early childhood education through what I did with my kids? And the first thing I had to recognize was how different all my kids were in terms of their individual needs that they were bringing to the classroom, their different interests, their different personalities. Before I can meet their needs, I have to know what they are. And just to give you a flavor of how I experienced that sort of that process of understanding the diverse needs of my students, I'd just like to share my thoughts that first day. This was the very first day I taught in September, and this is sort of as my children are coming into the classroom. The details of that day are a bit fuzzy, but I do remember the wide range of emotions revealed through their eyes, from excited to frightened. This was my first glimpse into the children's uniqueness as individuals. They had been alive for only 3 or 4 years, but they each brought a host of experiences, perceptions, concerns, hopes, and interests to our class. Jocelyn stayed close to her father and barely looked at me. Her father had to tell me her name because she was too shy. Najaya entered smiling, accompanied by 3 older siblings. She told me her name and its first letter, and I wrote it on her cubby. Tears gushed out of Jeffy's eyes and were soon smeared all over his face. He was not about to let me or anyone keep him away from his mother. He clung desperately to her as she motioned to walk out of the door. So that was just the first 2 minutes. So I basically came to understand that it would be a lot of work, and I sort of felt myself clamming up a bit and going back to that mental state of feeling a bit intimidated. But what it made me realize was that I needed some sort of framework for thinking about how it was that I was going to address and meet these needs. And I mean, I could talk a lot about my systems and my clipboard. I wore a fanny pack too. But what I think might be more helpful is to share with you, upon reflection, how I think about just the core elements or principles driving my approach to meeting my students.